All right, so if you have a Bible, if that's something you're keen on, I'm in John chapter 15. So John chapter 15, to give you some context, this is in the midst of the Last Supper. So the Last Supper, we've already had a few events. We've had, in John 13, we had Jesus washing his disciples' feet, which was kind of a big deal and an incredible story. And they're in the upper room, which is in Jerusalem itself. So the upper room doesn't exist anymore because it got destroyed. But then at some point, I think it was like the 12th century or something like that, I think the Crusaders, they built a new building. Anyway, if you go there now, you can actually go to the room that they call the upper room, and it's above where the kind of the tomb of David is, if you want to really believe that. But there is a holy site there where King David's tomb, that's at least where it is, and also not a very exciting sight. And if you go upstairs, there is quite a large room there, much bigger than this room, that is now the kind of pilgrimage place for going for the Last Supper. And it's clearly not where it happened. If you look around, there's a lot of Muslim motifs there, kind of telling you where Mecca is. And like it was obviously, this is just a building that was built 1,000 and a bit years later. But you can go to that place, so to speak, that is the upper room. And in there we have this moment where Jesus, he washes the feet of his disciples. And it's this beautiful thing because, beautiful but tragic as well, because he knows that this is the last time he will hang out with them. He knows that everything's about to change. He knows that he's about to be betrayed, and that's what happens at this meal. He says to Judas, go and do your thing. And there's the feet washing. And then we get to this passage in John chapter 15. And Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't bear fruit, and he prunes every branch that does bear fruit, so that it can bear more fruit. You are already clean. That's because of the word that I've spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. The branch can't bear fruit by itself, but only if it remains in the vine. In the same way, you can't bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. People who remain in me and I in them are the ones who bear plenty of fruit. Without me, you see, you can't do anything. If people don't remain in me, they are thrown out like a branch and they wither. People collect the branches and put them on the fire, and they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want and it will happen to you or for you. My Father is glorified in this, that you bear plenty of fruit and so become my disciples. So this conversation happens right after Judas has left already. And then Jesus is talking with Peter, and Peter says, I'll never betray you. That'll never happen. That's not a thing. And Jesus says, before the cock crows, you will have disowned me 3 times. So there's some awkwardness going on in their conversation at this point. And then Jesus encourages his disciples to trust him, and he says that he will send to them the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit, the Advocate, the Helper that will come for them. And then we get to chapter 15, I am the true vine. Now, the imagery of being the vine is an imagery that Jewish people understood that we likely don't understand in the same way. So when Jesus says, I am the true vine, the question then begs, well, who's the counterfeit? What's the fake vine? What's the vine that is the pretender? So in the Old Testament, the picture of Israel being the vine is very, very prominent. So in Isaiah 5, chapter 5, verse 7, it says, the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, and for righteousness, but he heard cries of distress. So this is a common theme in the Old Testament. It characterizes the nation of Israel as the vine and the people of Israel as the branches. And universally, it says, but they were crap branches. They did not bear fruit. They were bad. Like in this case, it says, he looked for justice, but he only saw bloodshed. And he looked for righteousness, but all he heard was cries of distress. In Jeremiah chapter 2:21, it says, I had planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into a corrupt wild vine? So the imagery is that God has taken his people out of Egypt and he plants them as a vine in the fertile soil of the promised land. But this vine does not bear good fruit at all. It's imagery that's repeated in the book of Ezekiel and Hosea and in the Psalms. And each time the branches are a disappointment, and they ultimately it says that they are trampled or destroyed or stripped off or thrown into fire or withered or cut down or burned. Again and again, Israel fails to honor God. So when Jesus is saying, I am the true vine, he's saying, quite offensively, Israel, who is claiming to be the true vine, and Judah, who are claiming to be the branches, it's not true. It's quite a controversy. Now, Jesus would have known a thing or two in the vineyard agricultural scene. He grew up in Galilee. Galilee was, even today, is considered one of the better wine growing areas. And they used to, just for people who are interested, they wouldn't plant vineyards on the flat ground. They planted vineyards on the slopes. And they would use all the rocks, because there's an incredibly rocky area there. You know, like when you're driving down to the snow and it's like paddocks but rocks everywhere? That's what it's like in the Holy Land. So they would get all the rocks and they would build these retaining wells, and they would build the vineyards into the hillsides, and they would use those rocks to build a watchtower. So the imagery that we find in the Old Testament often talks about the watchtower being there and the hills and the vineyards. This is a really common thing. So Jesus says, I am the true vine, unlike Israel. Jesus is saying, I'm not going to disappoint. I'm not going to let the team down, quite like Israel did. Where Israel has failed, Jesus fully intends to be triumphant, because he is the true Israel, and he is the one through which God's promises will actually be fulfilled. So I am the true vine, said Jesus. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't bear fruit, and he prunes every branch that does bear fruit so that it can bear more fruit. Okay, so if in verse 5 we get the final character, it details very explicitly that the branches are the disciples. So we have the true vine, Jesus, we have the gardener, which is God, and then the branches on this vine, that's the rest of us. They're all of our characters. Now, as a responsible gardener, God tends to the vine. So when you're growing grapes, I don't know where in my notes I talk about this. When you're growing grapes, there's like a special process for doing that, apparently. It's the same with roses. And if you don't prune it right, you end up with a huge mess. N.T. Wright says this, and I love this quote. It says, the vine dresser is never closer to the vine, taking more thought over its long-term health and productivity than when he has the knife in his hand. There are two types of branches here. There are the branches that are bearing fruit, and there are the branches that are not bearing fruit and will not bear fruit. And they both get to feel the sting of the knife. No one gets out of it without getting cut. It's kind of awful, but also really important for growth. It is interesting, though, this word for cut off in the Greek, you can, if you really try, you can translate this word to mean lift up. So some people, and not very many people agree with them, but some people think that this is saying that there are those who bear fruit who get pruned, and there are those who need help because they need to be lifted up in order to grow. So there is an alternative translation there, but it's not a particularly popular one. But on this true vine, there are still branches that need to be cut off. If we wind back to John chapter 6, there's this story where Jesus is teaching and he freaks everybody out a little bit because, like, in the Jewish culture, they're not meant to eat blood. Like, that's why it's a big deal for them. And then Jesus is like, well, if you want to be my disciple, you need to drink my blood and eat my flesh. Obviously making an allusion to what we would know in communion or the Eucharist, but to them it just freaked them out. And it says, from this time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. That's in John 6:66. So there is a time in Jesus' ministry where some of his disciples were so astonished by Jesus' teaching that they walked away and they no longer followed him. And they were cut off. They were no longer connected to the true vine. because they would rather keep their old identity and their old way of life, their old safe way of thinking, than to try this Jesus life and to follow him. They were prepared to follow Jesus when there was miraculous healing and free food, and they were prepared to follow when it meant the potential destruction of their enemies. They all liked that. They all thought this was great. If there's truly a new Messiah or the Messiah that is coming, then he will kill all the Romans. That was what they thought. That was what their Messiah was, a warlord. So when Jesus was given out free food and healthcare and had a big army, everyone wanted to follow him. But when it turned out he was a terrible socialist, but not a warlord, all of a sudden they were a little less keen to follow him, and the branches get cut off. This word that we translate as pruned in verse 2, let me pull back there. This is cool. So we have, he cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't bear fruit, and he prunes every branch that does bear fruit. Now, this is not a word that you would normally use in gardening context. Like, we translate it in the English so that it sounds like pruning is obviously it, but the words both come from the idea of being clean. It's super weird. Because it's the same word that they would have used to talk about being purified in a ceremonial type of way. So the word pruned in verse 2, we also see it as an adjective in the next verse where we actually translate it as clean. So we translate in verse 3, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. So there's this weird parallelism there where it's like, I have pruned you, or I've purified you, and now you are clean. This isn't the first time he used this language, though, in this same conversation. So a little earlier in chapter 13, when he's washing feet, he talks about those, this is in verse 10, chapter 13, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. There's this weird accusation in the midst of this, and it's because Judas is still there. So then he gets rid of Judas. Judas goes off to betray Jesus. And now he says, well, you're all clean. So there is this parallel there that it's kind of building on that. Jesus doesn't qualify his words this time around. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me and I will remain in you. The branch can't bear fruit by itself, but only if it remains in the vine. In the same way, you can't bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. People who remain in me and I in them are the ones who bear plenty of fruit. Without me, you can't do anything. Remain in me. I like the translation, abide in me. Continue in me. Endure in me. Persist in me. Wait in me. Stay in me. The vine is life to the branch. And without the vine, the branch is in big trouble. The tension in this message is that Jesus is the true vine rather than Israel. Rather than the Jewish nation being the branches, it is the disciples that are the branches. Jesus is kind of basically saying there's a new kingdom, a new world order, and I am the family that you will all be a part of. And as the true Israel, Jesus calls to his people to say, be the true people of Israel. But remaining in Jesus isn't just about having the right ideas. A lot of Christendom has this concept that if we have the right ideas, the right beliefs, then that is essentially all we need to do. I saw an interesting thing on Facebook this morning where, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but it basically said something about how conservative Christians are more wealthy. And then a very popular commentator of conservative Christianity said, well, it's because they live more healthy. They live better lives as conservative Christians, and God is blessing them. And I love that the number one response to that was, I think it's because the people with more progressive worldviews think that a camel can't get through the eye of a needle. And that if you are, in fact, incredibly wealthy, it's probably not because of God's blessing, it's because you are selfish. Anyway, I thought that was interesting because the right beliefs aren't enough. That doesn't make you connect to the vine. You actually need to be in the vine. You need to live the same way as the vine. You need to allow the gardener to come in and prune. And pruning is not a fun process. But just simply being conservative or being reformed or being evangelical or being progressive even, any of your worldviews are meaningless if you are not actually in the vine and bearing good fruit. And I promise you that wealth and health are not the kind of fruit that this is talking about. When we go back and we see that imagery where it talks about the vine in the Old Testament, remember what it said? He looked for justice, but he saw bloodshed. And he looked for righteousness, but he heard cries of distress. When we look at like the prophets, Amos and Hosea and these guys, there was plenty of wealth and prosperity in Israel at the time, but they were a bunch of godless heathens. They didn't care for righteousness and justice. The kind of fruit that we bear when we are in the vine is not simply just health and wealth and prosperity. The kind of fruit we bear is that there is none who are in need. There is no wars going on, and there are no refugees who aren't being cared for. There is no one who is mourning who isn't comforted. There is no one who isn't being cared for. That's what the fruit is. That's what we want to be, heavy laden with the fruit of love and kindness and peace and joy and hope and thankfulness and self-control and all of that stuff. The idea that we just believe a few right ideas and live prosperously, that isn't enough. To abide in him means affirming your belief with action. And it also means not going it alone. If my people don't remain in me, they are thrown out like a branch and they wither. People collect the branches and put them on the fire and they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want and it will happen for you. I'll talk about that in just a second. There is no such thing, though, as a solitary Christian. There is no such thing as a solitary Christian. The branches are connected to the vine. If you are disconnected from the vine, if you are solitary in faith, then you are not part of the vine. You don't bear fruit separate from the vine. A branch sitting by itself somewhere does not live very long. It's so important that you are connected to the vine, and that means connected to other believers. It means doing faith. It means doing community. It means doing life. It means having family. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want and it will happen for you. I wish I understood this verse better. I think a lot of damage has been done to the church and to the world in people just thinking, well, I don't even know how to. The best I can conclude about prayer is that it is foremost about shaping us. And as we become more like the vine, as we become closer to Jesus, our prayers reflect the heart of God more and more. So they reshape us instead of us trying to reshape God. The more we abide in the vine, the more our prayers are consistent with the will of the gardener. Our prayers shape us. That's why a contemplative practice is so helpful, because it helps us to center and shape ourselves to look more and sound more and be more like Jesus. And as we remain in him, he uses those prayers to form us then into his likeness. And my Father is glorified in this, that you bear plenty of fruit and so become my disciples. It's as we do this that God has glory. It's not all just about worship or even Bible reading, because the word became flesh. It's not just about the book, and it's not just about the ceremonial aspects, and it's not just about the programs and stuff. God is glorified in this, that you bear plenty of fruit. So we've got to bear fruit. By growing strong and by being fruitful, we become agents of his glory. We radiate his goodness when we grow. So there are a few things in this passage that I find particularly challenging. The first one is that everyone got pruned here. The branches that got tossed off because they weren't pursuing the vine at all, they got pruned off. And then the branches that were healthy, though, they also got pruned, which says to me that it's not all going to be easy. When you are planting a vine, in the first year, all you do really, once it's grown shoots, is you just prune that sucker. You cut off basically everything that looks like it's bearing fruit, and you cut it all off so that it will grow in the right way. You want it to propagate and do the thing that you exactly want. So you cut off everything else. And then in the second year, you cut off everything again, but you train it. So they would, like on a vineyard, they would train the growth to be out across the vineyard so that it would be able to bear the most fruit. And then in the third year, if you're lucky, it will bear some fruit. There is a process of trial and a process of perseverance and a process of pruning in order to bear fruit. We need to let God prune the dead and withering parts of us, the twisted parts of us. Because if you don't prune, like on a rose bush, if you don't prune it, what happens is it grows wild and it wraps in on itself and it suffocates itself. And it doesn't, so it might produce a lot of very, very poor flowers, or in the case of the vine, it'll produce a harvest of poor fruit. But if you prune it and open it up, the sun can hit it right and it can grow right, and it will produce a much more, in the case of a rose, vibrant, beautiful, perfect flowers. Or in the case of the vine, it will bear better fruit. But it's hard. Being vulnerable is hard. Doing community is hard. Laying things down is hard. Letting things go is hard. And so this isn't me saying a quick prayer magically fixes things. In my notes here, I have, you are 100% allowed to have a relationship with Jesus and a therapist. Because working through stuff is difficult. But to do that, to go through those yards, to do that work, to develop and grow as a human being, to work past bitterness and hurt and trauma, that is beautiful. And that's what it is to be pruned so that you can bear greater fruit, so you can be healthy. The reason that the gardener prunes the vine is to make it healthy. It can take years for the gardener to shape the vine, to bear good fruit. And I don't know about you, but there are definitely things in my life that need pruning. There are old ways of thinking and habits and even ambitions or destructive behaviors, selfishness, grief, hurt. These are things that I need to get rid of if I want to be able to grow. So I want to encourage you, look at your life honestly and ask the heavenly vine keeper what needs to be pruned. And then have a moment of contemplation where you say, what does that process look like for me? How do I actually go through that personal growth? Because so many people get so bound up by the stuff that they have the thorns are wrapped around them, that they cannot get free. They just can't see any hope in that. So we need to be intentional about making sure that we grow in a healthy way. Some people have been really hurt by the church, or they've been hurt by their parents or by their family or by their friends or by their school experience. Or we carry trauma in our bodies and in our bones, and it hurts us in an ongoing way. But I want to tell you that God has no agenda to hurt you. And when he comes as the vine keeper to prune the vine, he does it because he loves you and he cares for you and he wants you to be healthy and he wants you to bear good fruit. He wants you to be, he wants you to have all the good stuff, the joy and the peace and the hope in your life. You can trust that God doesn't want to hurt you. And I know that for some people, the baggage they carry is so significant, it feels like that can't possibly be true. But God loves you and he wants you to be free from that bondage. You don't need to be scared of him. But then there is the flip side of that. There are just some people carrying around petty grievances or unforgiveness or bitterness, or you just constantly getting up on the wrong side of the bed. Just prune that off. Like seriously, it's unpleasant for everyone, especially yourself. Secondly, the branches have to be connected to the vine. That's how we connect to the other branches as well. To be connected to the vine is to be connected to the other branches. If you want to bear lots of fruit, you need to do that with the other branches. We need to be deeply connected to one another if we will be healthy. And this is hard because sometimes other branches have thorns. Sometimes the other branches are the real problem. I'm not saying that we need to allow other people to hurt us. We need healthy boundaries to stop ourselves from being taken advantage of or being hurt. But we also need to recognize that we are a vine with branches and we need one another. That's part of the deal. Now, I'm not trying to diminish anyone's hurt or trauma. I'm just saying that if we bear good fruit, we're most likely to do that together. So connect deeply. I was talking to a friend of mine in the last fortnight. They're writing an essay on discipleship, and they wanted to do a case study on our church, which worried me greatly because we don't have a lot of discipleship programs at all, any. And I realized at the end of this conversation, we worked really hard to not have any programs. We had programs, and we pruned those suckers off because they didn't necessarily bear good fruit. They just exhausted us. But what I did realize at the end of this is discipleship or leadership for us. When people come to us and they say, how do we serve in church? Brooke always wants me to say children's church. She always says, make sure you say children's church. You can definitely help with children's church. But apart from that, they say, what can we do? And we're like, invite people over to your house and feed them. Invite people over to your house and watch a movie. Get together with other people. Do life together. Be friends with one another, not just Sunday acquaintances. That's what good discipleship looks like. It's having deeply intimate connections where you lean on one another and know one another and trust one another and help each other. Be connected to the vine and through that connected to one another. The last thing that I want to say is that it's not anyone else's responsibility to prune your vine, and it's not your responsibility to prune anyone else's vine. It's the gardener that does the pruning. So just quit it with the judgment. Quit it with the nagging. Quit it with the, you need to do this or I'm going to, there's already enough judgment in the idea of church. We don't need to add to it by trying to prune each other. Now, if people are being destructive, if their vine is hurting you or choking you, we have boundaries and we work together so that we don't hurt each other in community. But it's the gardener that does the pruning. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a really good gardener and that even though for some of us when we try to keep a garden, we kill a lot of things, that you bring life. That you bring health. I pray that you would bring your health and life to this community and that we would bear good fruit, that we would glorify you as we bear good fruit, that we would stay deeply connected to the vine and through that connected to one another. I pray that we would be pruned rigorously, but carefully, with kindness and compassion. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.